Welcome to Rambam and Death. Today we're going to be discussing the Rambam Hilchos Mechirah, Perik Yud Aleph, Halacha Ches and Tes. In Halacha Ches, the Rambam says, Misha Macha Chatzera Yisedehu, Upirish B'Shas Mechirah, Shehu Meicha Kedei Leilach L'Makom Pleini. Someone sells his courtyard or his field, and he stipulates at the time of the sale that the reason why he's doing this is because he has to travel elsewhere, and or maybe because there's no rain and he has to buy wheat with the value of his courtyard. It's like he sells something with a stipulation, with a condition attached to it. And therefore, what happens if the rain comes down, or wheat arrives and they were now cheaper, or the trip to go to that other place where he wants to go was withheld from him, something happened, then he couldn't travel. Something happened that he couldn't go up, there was no obstacle, but whatever had happened that he couldn't travel, or he couldn't buy the wheat, and therefore there's no reason why he would want to sell his property. He returns the money and he gets his property back. Why? Because he made it clear. He specified that he's only selling it because he wants to do this. He wants to travel elsewhere. He needs the money for something else. But once he doesn't need the money anymore, or he's not traveling, then he would never have sold it. And he made that very clear. Is there anything similar to this? In other words, whenever you sell something with a stipulation that I'm selling it because of this and this reason, and the reason is no longer relevant, he could cancel and void the sale. Now here's where we get into a statement of the Rambam that challenges that premise somewhat. But if someone sells something without specifying, even though in his heart he's selling it for this and this reason, even though it's clear from the situation that he's only selling it in order to be able to do such and such, and it didn't happen, he cannot void the sale. Why? He did not articulate it. He did not verbalize that. Words of the heart are not words, literal translation. In other words, what you do verbally, in action, in speech, that determines the course of events. What happens in your heart, you can't change the situation just because you had a mental reservation about this process. Now, what happens if it's so clear? For example, the Gemara in Kedushin of Memtes Omid Beis, a person who thought that his son had died and therefore he wouldn't inherit, so he sells his property and gives his property as a gift to another person. And then he discovers that his son is alive. So the gift is null and void. Why? Even though he didn't specify, the reason why I'm giving this gift to you is because I don't have a son to whom I should bequeath this. He didn't specify that, but it's clear to everyone. And therefore, other Rishonim, other than the Rambam, seem to hold that whenever it's clear that the sale was made because of a certain reason, even though he didn't articulate it, the sale could be voided. However, the Rambam, that's a Gemara. The Rambam can't go against the Gemara. The Rambam does bring that Gemara, but he brings it in another place, in the Hilchos Umatana, Perik Vav Halacha Aleph. And this is what he says. La'olam eimdem das hanais, and we always evaluate the intention of the giver of a gift. Im hayu hadvarim marin seibdaite, eisem al piha eimed, afa bishlei pirish. If the circumstances demonstrate conclusively that this is what his intentions were, even though he didn't specify it verbally, it nevertheless determines the situation, just his mental intentions. So we see that the Rambam seems to be contradicting himself. Here in Hilchos Mechirah, he doesn't make that stipulation. He doesn't make that exception where everyone could see that it was given for a certain reason, as in the case where a father disinherits his son because he thinks his son is no longer alive. It's obvious that it's only because he thought he was no longer alive. So why does the Rambam mention that? Not here. He mentions that in Hilchos Zechiyah, which seems to contradict what he says here in Hilchos Mechirah. The Even Ha'azal, the commentary on the Rambam, explains a very basic difference. He says the difference is that the Rambam holds that a gift is different from a sale. A gift is one-sided. A gift is only the person who's giving it. The person who's receiving it just has to agree to receive it, but he's not really part of the process of making the transfer of ownership from the giver to the recipient. You don't need his approval to make the sale. Obviously, if he says, I don't want to receive it, you can't go against his will, but he's not an active participant in the transfer. By contrast, when you sell something, selling has two parties to it. You're selling something, but the other person is also giving something to you in return. So there's two parties that have equal, you could argue, have equal role in making this transaction occur. Therefore, you can't just go by what one party had in mind to impose itself on what the other party did not have in mind. And that's why in Hilchos Mechirah, the Rambam does not make that stipulation that if it's obvious, demonstrative to everyone that he had in mind to make this transaction because of X, Y, Z, the Rambam doesn't agree with that. You can't go by what he's thinking because you have two parties. In Hilchos Zechiyah Matana, where he's talking about a gift, there you only need one side, and that one side, if it's clear to everyone that that's what his intentions were, then we go by the intention, even though it wasn't verbalized.